Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I managed the 5+ days of my wife's trip to see her family in Louisiana without losing my mind here at home, which is nice. It's the first time I've been alone for an extended stretch since the pandemic began, but I managed to get into nice conversation with the voices in my head, and I got to tweak some of my daily routines, and I had to host my quarterly board meeting, and got to watch some basketball, read a couple of books, and otherwise generally keep things together pretty well. Our dog Bendico was pretty mopey, but he's a mama's dog, and I sort of expected him to be kind of forlorn while Amy was away. Now, I'm off for a couple of overnight or 2-night trips over the next 2 weeks with trade shows in Philadelphia and New York. And I've got a business trip to San Diego via Los Angeles next month, which I mentioned, I think, last week. Those will be my first flights since the before time, and that'll also involve my being away for a couple of days. So we'll see if Benny even remembers me when I come home, but I was pretty sure he was going to smash his tail in half when he got to see Amy come in the door on Saturday. But anyway, enough of the domestic stuff. Let's get to this week's show. Now, my guest this time is Charlie Porter, who is the author of the wonderful new book, What Artists Wear, from W.W. Norton. It actually came out last year in the UK from Penguin, but this is its North American release. What Artists Wear is a fun, thoughtful, engaging book about, well, what artists wear. Charlie will talk about his approach to it and his philosophy about it, but I'll tell you at the outset, it's not a fashion book. It's not, how to dress like artist X. It's really an exploration of not just what artists wear or what they wore, but why they wore it. That is, there's this whole matrix of utility, workwear, literally, coding, self-expression, protective coloration, narrative queering, and more that permeates this book and the artists who Charlie profiles and explores inside it. And what's neat is the photography and the art reproductions that are in it. They're really well reproduced, but rather than being set off from the text, the images are integrated into the flow of Charlie's prose, making it all part of the narrative, all part of what he's laying out. And Charlie's prose it's conversational, it is infectiously enthusiastic and knowledgeable / passionate about both art and clothing. And it all makes What Artists Wear an absolute joy to read. And that whole gestalt of word and photo and art really gets at not just what clothing means, but what we mean when we wear it, if that makes sense. And a lot of this will come out through the conversation, but really go check out What Artists Wear, out now in the US and Canada from Norton, out in the UK from Penguin. Now, I've enjoyed Charlie's writing over the years in Fantastic Man and GQ and elsewhere, so I was awfully happy that he was up for recording. I forget where I saw the first mention of the book, but I zapped him a line through Instagram. I wrote the publishers. They got back to me almost simultaneously saying, yes, it would be great. Since Charlie lives in London and is in the UK, I was getting ready for us to do a remote session, but a few days before, he surprised me with the news that he's actually in New York for a launch event. So we decided to record in person. As it turned out, the morning he was heading home. And as I mentioned in the conversation, I was extremely self-conscious about what to wear. I kind of planned this whole thing so I would seem casual, smart, not overdoing it, etc. Then there was this huge rainstorm, and I didn't want to wreck any of the suits I was going to go with. And anyway, Charlie answered the door in a T-shirt and track pants, and I realized, as ever, I was overthinking things. So there'll be a picture of that in the show notes for this one, so you'll get the casual wear. But anyway, as caveats go, because it's in person, I didn't have the space down right, so the sound is a little echoey. Also, there's this clicking in the background. That's the rain, which was really heavy, against the window and AC unit. So sorry if it's distracting, but I'm really glad we got to do this one in person. Well, the place he was staying while in New York was an absolute joy to check out, but I also really dug the in-person vibe that we got going. So here's Charlie's bio from the UK edition of the book. Charlie Porter is a writer, fashion critic, art curator, and lecturer in fashion at the University of Westminster. He has contributed to titles such as Financial Times, Guardian, New York Times, GQ, Luncheon, ID, and Fantastic Man, and has been described as one of the most influential fashion journalists of his time. He was a juror for the Turner Prize in 2019 and lives in London. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Charlie Porter. So tell me where the book began for you and how it changed from what you thought it was going to be.
The book began from a tiny, 300-word column in the Financial Times. I didn't have a column in the Financial Times, but I was asked to sit in for the fashion editor who was on vacation. And so I did. I took her spot for 1 week in the FT weekend, and at that time there was Agnes Martin retrospective in London, which this is 2015. That's the retrospective that then travelled to the Guggenheim in New York and to LACMA, I think, in LA. And it was this kind of wild moment where this artist who's it's kind of a mystery for so many people because they don't get to see her work. Like all this work came together, and you could really kind of glory in the world she created. And so it's this really big moment, this Agnes Martin show. And in the catalogue, there was a photograph of Agnes Martin that was taken by Alexander Lieberman, and it was taken in Quentis slip. Which is, I think it still exists. It's a kind of strip down in near Wall Street. And at the time it was fishermen's warehouses or abandoned fishermen's warehouses that a group of queer artists had kind of taken over and were living in. So Jasper Johns lived there. I'm now going to say artist names and think, did they live there? But there's a kind of collective of...
Or they hung out.
And a collective of queer artists kind of made it their home. And she's wearing this quilted jacket and pants, and she's holding a kind of wooden beam, which I think she was using it to draw the grid of lines on her canvases. And at this point, she'd only just started using the grid, and it would be the grid that then formed her work from then onwards. It was like the real turning point where she discovered the grid. And the jacket and the pants completely threw me because they looked just like the workwear by a young London designer called Craig Green, who starts every collection from a workwear jacket. Everything he does, the foundation is kind of in humble workwear, and he uses quilting, and it looked like Craig's work, and it completely kind of collapsed time for me because it really brought me present with Agnes Martin by thinking about her clothes, because it made me think about the conditions that she was working in and living in, and it's like, no, that's not fashion, it's actually utility, because she needs to wear quilting because it's so cold in a warehouse with no gas, electric. And by thinking about her clothing, it brought me closer to her. And then I enjoyed the exhibition even more because I was kind of brought closer to her. And at the same time, there was an exhibition that was at Tate Modern and at Tate Britain. We have two Tates in London. At Tate Britain, there was a Barbara Hepworth exhibition. And the British designer Margaret Howell had done a tiny little capsule collection of kind of utility garments inspired by Barbara Hepworth. And so I wrote this 300-word column on the clothing of artists. I got these 2 hooks. It's like, brilliant, let's do it. Yeah. And I also spoke to a couple of contemporary artists as well and asked them about their clothing. And I loved writing it. Like, it was so rich. I really got involved in it, and it felt like something that I was happy to have written it. And then that weekend, an editor contacted me on every form of everything ever. I was like, hey, I think this is a book.
I'm not even on this platform.
And so then that's how the conversation started. It turns out it didn't happen with that publishing house. It went to another, and blah, blah, blah. And then that's a whole circuitous story to then be when I met my editor at Penguin, where the book originated. She came up and was like, hey, have you ever thought of doing a book? And I was like, well, there's this idea that's kind of pretty fully formed. What do you think about it? So to your second question, like, how did it change? The column is pretty much a shrunk, like a boiled down version of what the book is. It's the same arguments and the same.
I go with the origami thing where you put it in the water and suddenly unfolds into.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hadn't gone back and read it for years. And then when the book came out in the UK, I went back and read it. It's like, oh no, it's that thing. It just unraveled and unfolded. Yeah. The big change though is that I think I'd presumed that it would be a kind of picture-based book, kind of coffee table book kind of thing, just because I just presumed that's what it would be. But always from the beginning of when we started working on the proposal right back in 2015, I always wrote these like texts and language to go with it. And throughout the whole process, like the two weren't gelling. Like a coffee table book kind of needs like snippets of
just short
stuff,
bursts of prose,
but not thinking. And it was when I started talking with my editor at Penguin that she was like, oh, Ways of Seeing and John Berger, this extraordinary book from the 1960s, which integrates image into text as if sentences, and it's kind of it's part of the text. So it's not decorative; it is the text. So the images are the text, and in the book, I repeatedly say, in the following image, you can see this.
Right.
Or
it's literally referred as a flow of copy. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's not like something on the page to make the page look nice. It's there. Every image is there for a reason. And so that's the big change from the beginning is this kind of permission, that John Berger gave me, to use images like sentences
but along with the permission, intimidation and I'll just do another John Berger sort of that'll be my first
but the good thing is it's nothing to do with John Berger, like it's nothing to do with looking in that way. So it was just permission to really push into what you can do with word and image yes, that was the big change. Yeah,
and that integration of it. Now I only have the American edition, which is a different trim size, et cetera, from the British one. Yeah. But the integration of that sort of stuff within layout is always a challenge. I know it's the and we got to finish here, and the image has to be part of the flow.
Yeah, but the thing with that though is it's a challenge, but then it's not a challenge because it's like obviously there it took thinking in design. But also the thing for me in both is that like often the best design is kind of undesigned design. Yeah. So if you try to make the page look pretty by balancing a photo top left to bottom right, or like or thinking that every spread needs to have a difference or a theme, or then that to me is banal. Whereas if it is like, here's the text, we need to stop now for an image, here's an image. And obviously, there's then little tricks that need to happen, because if it's a portrait image, it needs much more room than a landscape image. So it took a lot of work, but it was good work. It was always like it was always, I was thinking things, the hard work is part of the result. And it wasn't hard work with conflict. It was hard work with like, oh, let's really push to see.
This is all getting to the goal.
Make it work. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, it's a gorgeous book. At least, again, the U.S. one, gorgeous to look at.
Absolutely. So, I'm only referring to the Penguin just because of that being the origin. But the American book is exactly the same. It just is bigger size, and so it flows slightly differently. But it's exactly the same relationship between word and image. So
we'll get to your history with fashion, No, okay. I first came across your work in, Fantastic Man, I guess, a whole bunch of years ago, which is one of those things. I'm like, hey, I know that guy's name once I saw this coming out, but that's the guy I used to read when I first started caring about what I wore, which now you can tell, who cares. But tell me about your history with art.
So my parents are both artists. They met at the Slade, which is a college in London.
I just interviewed Celia Paul for the second time, so we had a nice little talk there.
Yeah. So and they met at the Slade in the early 60s and kind of fell in love straight away and were together. My mum was the year above my dad. They met at a Halloween party, apparently. This is the story they say. But
did they tell you what costumes they were in?
I think Halloween in London in 1963 was not Halloween of the United States in the 21st century. We're just getting Americanized Halloween in the UK now. But in my childhood, Halloween was not what...
There was that moment in the book where you mentioned having no idea who Mr. Rogers was. And I was like, my God, that's such a culture thing. And of all weird stuff, for me, it's something, if it's someone from a, alien culture, that's different. But I was like, Mr. Rogers is.
That's the artist Chantal Joffe who grew up she's British, but she grew up in America, and she describes the act of putting on her studio clothes like Mr. Rogers putting on his cardigan. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But my parents are artists, and so I grew up with them making work, but also my dad, to kind of fund having a family and fund being an artist, he was an art teacher, I think what you call high school, like we just call it school. And I wasn't at that school. And so they would do school trips to the Tate all the time. They would bring their classes down to the Tate in London, and I would go on the school trip because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get home in time to pick me up from the bus from school. So I got a day off school and went on these trips to the Tate. I mean, we always went to art institutions on holidays anyway, so we were doing it as well. But it was also this thing of like regularly going to exhibitions as a kind of active thing to do for pleasure, and not just in a kind of touristic way or in like a day trip kind of way, but actively like, we're going to go. And I saw the most extraordinary shows with them, and also in the Tate they have work by Nam Garbo, who is an artist who was in the UK. I think is a Russian born, but was in the UK, and he made these kind of sculptures, often in perspex, but with these kind of wires going across, like, so this kind of like. This kind of tension of this kind of thread connecting these forms. I was completely blown away by him, and the first art book, I still have it, is a tiny little exhibition guide for a Nam Garbo show that actually I didn't see, but I just bought the book in the shop, like age 8, and a show by Tangley, who I always pronounce wrong, but I think I've said it right, and The Snail by Matisse was always in the end gallery, and so looking at art was always just part of what we did as a kid. And so it's just kind of what I do. So art's always been there. But weirdly, when I started being a journalist in the 90s, I just presumed that arts writing would be what I would want to do. And it certainly was the kind of easiest thing for me to do as a queer human on going to newspapers in the UK in the 90s, not particularly safe spaces. You had to kind of work out how to come out to your colleagues. It was really that they were very, very misogynist, very homophobic.
We have the same stereotype here about newsrooms and
absolutely,
papers,
and but it's kind of shocking to remember how bad it was. I think they've. maybe changed a bit now, but so the arts desk was a kind of safe haven, and I presumed I would love doing arts journalism. I hated it. I hated the relationship. I hated the place that the arts journalists put themselves in, or was asked to put themselves in, with the work that was being made or with the artist. I hated the kind of thing of the artist does their work, leaves the room, and then the journalist turns up and goes, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't feel comfortable in that place. That's not to say that I don't enjoy reading other arts journalists or art writing, but I didn't enjoy it, and I couldn't find a space for myself in that. Maybe that's because artists were my parents, and it's quite easy psychology to understand, and so I did arts journalism for a while, but I really just did not like it at all. And then found my path into doing fashion, which is completely different. And fashion's this kind of secret place of writing. I still think it's the same, where because it's so derided and seen as so frivolous and facile
and feminine, as you point out,
as well.
It's always
absolutely. I say at the beginning of the book that fashion writing on newspapers normally means women's fashion writing, and it's done in a demeaning way, and often in newspapers, print and also online, images of women usually wearing less clothes or I'm going to do a speech about sexy clothes is used to lure readers in, or as balance to serious news, and it's used as fluff, and so fashion is derided and seen as this lesser thing. And once you get used to that, then it's like, oh wait, so no one's really looking at what I'm doing in terms of like what I'm doing. So in the space of fashion, I can talk about politics, I can talk about sociology, I can talk about the environment, I can talk about misogyny, I can talk about homophobia, or you can talk about all these things, how humans relate to each other. You can be observational, you can do all this work within fashion journalism, and no one know that you're going to do it. Yeah. Whereas if I went up to the editor and say, hey, I want to do a piece that addresses misogyny, blah, 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 they'd be like, yeah, get out of here. You can't. So it's this space where, because we all wear clothes, you can address everything with everyone, and also the other big difference as well with fashion criticism, which is what I then went on to do, was that I was the fashion critic for the FT, the menswear critic. And so if you go to an art show or anything that the public can engage with, then you immediately have a direct relationship in that way that I didn't like, of passing judgment to something that people can actually be present at. And I didn't like that for myself.
Was there also the pressure for access sort of thing? Write something good because you want to make sure you're invited to the next.
What, in terms of fashion?
Yeah.
No, actually not at all, because they wanted the FT there.
Gotcha,
there's not that at all. No, the thing with fashion writing is that even so, if I reviewed like the Prada show, even if someone wanted something that I wrote about, wanted to buy something, they couldn't buy it for 6 months because the shows happened 6 months before. Yeah. Most of the stuff in the shows isn't actually produced. And so it might be the case that 6 months later, one person might maybe buy one thing that I might maybe have mentioned in a 500, 600 word piece. So therefore there's something else going on rather than just, hey, this art show is great, go and see this art show. There's something else going on in the act of criticizing fashion, which is doing so much more work, and I found so much more interesting than just a thing of like, hey, the Prada show, you should go buy something from it. And so I always found it a really enjoyable space to kind of really push into and push out into, and to see what you can do in this space. So yeah, that was a super long answer to explain.
No, that's the stuff I'm really interested in, especially the fact that you're working in the menswear space. Given that is also something that, and you have you have a chapter on tailoring, right, and it's something that threads through a chunk of the rest of the book, as to how men look, right, and what we do out in the world. Which again, I started reading your stuff in Fantastic Man, which is a very I'd say not, mainstream American perspective on men and menswear. I think my wife actually got me the subscription to it, and I was like, weirdly fitting. Okay, yeah, I appreciate this.
But Fantastic Man was always in thrall of American dress, but it was from a Dutch point of view. Fantastic Man is a Dutch magazine, and part of its glamour was it kind of looked at the language of American fashion magazines from the 80s or 70s or 80s and kind of took the mickey out of it a bit, but also kind of was in love with it as well. And
I did try the rake a few years later, but unfortunately I'm an old man and I can't read the little tiny type that they use. I can't. I can look at the pictures, but I literally can't read what's in this magazine. So,
but the thing with menswear was that when I switched to menswear in 2004. I'd been a critic at The Guardian. I was the deputy fashion editor of The Guardian, which meant women's wear. And, I mean, there were other reasons. I needed to get a mortgage. They weren't paying me enough. I was offered a job at GQ. Yeah. I took the job. But it was also, I remember very clearly the last season I did of women's wear reviews in 2004. It was, it was a season of dresses. It was a spring collection. And fashion was much simpler then. It was much more like one thing. And everyone was doing dresses. And I really remember being like, I'm not sure what I can say about this because, I conform to the gender.
I was going to say, you don't wear dresses, which I don't mean in a derisive way.
And it was like, why am I not writing about what I wear? And so I switched then, but at that time, menswear was really, underserved and under considered, and also I've come to realize for very serious reasons, because I genuinely believe that there was a kind of vacuum of menswear in the 1990s and early 21st century, and still to this day, because of AIDS crisis and because of everyone that died, and not just designers but customers and
I've mentioned this on the show before. There's a Fran Lebowitz, not theory, but her proposal that, and I'm going to preach to you about gay upbringing as a straight man, but that sense of older gay men helping younger men get opera, ballet, dance, just culture in general. And once you wipe out an entire generation of that, you end up with...
exactly.
And this is all, again, me
but it's correct.
But,
and the thing is also what happens if the fashion has to carry on, and in terms of an industry, and so 90s into the 21st century, menswear carried on, but without the creativity and influence and history that had been building and growing. And so in 2004 it was there was no menswear in London, like it was seen, and it was as if there couldn't be no menswear in London. And actually, what happened? Some people acted to bring it back. I was kind of involved in it. What it was actually was to bring it back rather than to invent something new and to allow menswear to exist. So basically, over the period that I wrote about menswear,
you were also advocating and helping.
But also the thing is that the luxury brands, after being like, it's just that thing that happens over there, suddenly realise that men are spending money. We can exploit this. And we're now in a position where it's really kind of drives the fashion industry. But the thing is that within that, there's been so much change, and this huge change is about tailoring, which is the first chapter in my book, first kind of theme chapter.
Yeah, you alternate between the sort of biographical artists and the themes like that. Yeah.
So there are chapters on individual artists that act as bridges between theme chapters that bring together a group of other artists. So and tailoring's the beginning, and it's always been I've always been interested in it because I've never worn a suit in a kind of real way. I've owned them, but I've never worn them in any sort of day-to-day way because I've never had to, and my parents didn't, so it's not part of any tradition of understanding of how men are. And it's always been completely confusing and kind of perplexing to me that I'm meant to be understanding male garments through this thing that I never wore. And so I've always wanted to explore it and investigate it. And also the other thing as well is that it's talked about as this kind of thing of like so powerful or whatever, but then Steve Jobs.
Yeah,
and because
there's the FU money where you no longer need to wear a suit.
Exactly. But and you know, because I was writing for the FT, I was always thinking about the humans who would be buying and reading the FT and Steve Jobs. So you know, to go on with this lie of like, oh yeah, tailoring is the this. It's like, but it really clearly isn't. But it also has got this power and resonance. And in terms of artists.
To get back to the book, which I know we're going to do, trust me. But
yeah. But in terms of artists, it's like, wait, if we look at tailoring, then we can look at the language of patriarchy in clothing, which completely dominates the last century and within which artists are working. So, yeah.
And you have that wonderful piece on Francis Bacon within it, showing his workspace as this utter disaster of a mess, and him not in tailoring, but you know, very very well dressed in all the photos in it, and you know, that idea that he's creating a persona who is supposed to be the Francis Bacon, you know, who's making all of this art as opposed to
with the hell around him. Yeah.
But again, if it weren't for the terrible rain, I would have shown up in a suit, not a shirt and tie or anything. It would have had, you know, something else going on. But I tend to try to at least, it's in fact exactly what you're talking about in the book. It's a signal on my part, not a sign of, you know, I'm showing a dominant masculine thing by wearing this, but a respect, regardless of what the guest is going to be wearing. And when I not show up in a t-shirt, et cetera, because I'm taking their time, I should at least, you know, show that I put something together before coming here. And then it was an absolute gale outside, and I thought, I really don't want to wreck a suit walking around New York and this stuff. So, you know,
I should say I'm sat here in t-shirt and track pants. So like,
we'll take a picture after the show. People will know you're, you know, which again, I'm waking you up at this hour. So, but that confluence of the artists, sort of the way you talked about just now, the progression of fashion and sort of the way things have, there was a single story once upon a time and things have fragmented, seems to be mirrored to me in the course of the book chronologically as you deal with some of the older artists or the ones of the past century. I guess it's the tension between workwear and casual. We'll jump right into that. And then what it says about the art and the artists who are characterizing that transition. Because at the beginning, again, when you talk about Agnes Martin and artists like that, they're in clothing that is necessary for the type of art they're making. Right. Yeah. And near the end, you're working with a lot more, you're profiling a lot more video artists and ones for whom there isn't a physical application of the art, and what they choose to wear becomes a very different thing. Talk about that, because I've been contemplating that from the beginning and what it means about art itself. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the thrill of the book for me was research and writing is the same thing for me. Like, they happen at the same time. Yeah. And I wrote most of the book in the British Library, which is our version of the New York Public Library.
There is a sense of, ooh, look at this, like an immediacy in your prose that I really did.
And that's real. Like, it was like, I would find something, like, oh wow, I can say that. And so I knew I wanted to write about Agnes Martin. I knew I wanted to write about Andy Warhol as well. And I realized that by talking about these artists, they were part of generations that were adopting clothing that had previously just been worn for utility. And but for utility, I mean by laborers or working classes. And Agnes Martin wore kind of painter smocks, or the hardware, the quilted garments I was talking about before. With Andy Warhol, is jeans, and it's kind of wild to think about jeans as anything other now than the kind of luxury good that if we wanted now, we could go out a few blocks and spend like thousands of pounds on a pair of jeans from luxury conglomerate brands. But I spoke with the archivist at Levi's, and she said that they have like one of the first pairs of jeans that were worn by miners in the late 19th century, and the jeans, they would have been kept in the mudroom, it was called, where they changed in and out of the clothes they wore in the mines. And the jeans they know would have been worn by more than one person, more than one miner, because the knee marks were in different places. So denim jeans went from this garment of absolute like total utility to this kind of luxury product. And Warhol was part of the generation that was part of that shift. And by realizing that was happening, it meant I could write about Warhol himself in that way as part of this generation that moved into cities and moved into fashion and art as a way of being after the Second World War.
And his coming from coal country also in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Agnes Martin, I realized that for her, utilitarian garments were actually a mode of survival because Agnes Martin was queer, she was schizophrenic, she was a Zen Buddhist. And I have a line in my book, these are all qualities that were not particularly acceptable for women in the 20th century in America, especially the early 20th century. And so she wasn't going to be wearing a blouse, she wasn't going to be wearing the what was seen as acceptable clothing for women in the early 20th century. And what she did was she wore utilitarian garments. And actually utilitarian garments became a way of actually existing, of actually having utility in your life. Like by wearing the utilitarian garment, she could live. Like functional clothes allow you to function, full stop. It's so weird how elemental these sentences are, but actually how often do you go into a store and try something on? It's like, oh, it doesn't quite fit. The arm doesn't move right. And maybe you still buy it because you like the look, but then you spend your whole time like, oh, this is kind of riding up on why am I wearing it? You can't function in it.
Yeah, I will tell you, just as an aside, I thought of wearing something today that I bought on my very last trip before the pandemic. A client of mine flew me and my wife to Japan, and I got this wonderful Issey Miyake pleated, not mock turtleneck, basically, which I've never worn because I came back February 2020 with it, and there's never been an occasion to wear it since. And I thought, I'm going to take this out and try it. I'm like, I don't even know which side is front. I at least took, that department store guy is going to be happy I bought this from him. But yes, there are pieces of clothing that you'll look at. I'm like, this seemed like a good idea, but there's actually no functional purpose to this whatsoever.
Exactly. And one of the things about the book, and the underlying things about the book, is this thing of like, why is functional clothing so desirable? And even today, why is functional clothing so desirable? And almost seems like this kind of magical thing when you find a kind of perfect functional garment. And it is because it allows you to function. And by thinking about Agnes Martin this way, it's like, oh, she was trying to find ways to function. Like she was living in Coenties Slip, and that's where she found her grid. But she hated New York. She hated art scene. She hated the city. It did not fit with her. It did not fit with who she was. And so she suddenly disappeared. She cut her hair off. She disappeared. And there was this 18 months where no one knows where she was. I think she had like a camper van and she traveled around the country, but there's no one knows where she actually went or what she did. She just disappeared. And then she suddenly turned up in New Mexico, where she then lived for the rest of her life. And she would build her own homes. Like she functioned as a human being. Like literally she would build her own home, and she lived a very kind of Spartan life. But it was also a life of pleasure. People would go and visit. She would give them a drink, to eat. It wasn't one of kind of
monastic.
Exactly. It wasn't monastic. But it was what she needed to do to function. And she wore functional clothes, and that it's so kind of intrinsic to understanding who she was, this idea of function and functionality. But the casual clothing that artists wear now, I say very generally the casual clothing that artists wear now, but it
there
also
are exceptions.
With the way,
I'm not trying to simplify too much.
But there is this kind of arc, and it's more also the casual clothing that many of us wear now. Like that, so it's also kind of echoing society. To me, it's about infiltration, and so the artists working in video or in performance or in sound, often they don't want people to know they're an artist. If they're recording, they might want to record stealthily. It's not about turning up like, hey, I'm an artist and I'm about to record you. Like they actually need to be kind of quite humble and quite quiet, and be able to kind of navigate through the communities in which they're working to film or do their performance, or it might even be that they're generating code. They're writing code. That shows how old I am. I think I'm not sure if you do generate code. Writing code,
compile,
whatever you do with code. They might just be in their bedroom writing code to create some sort of and again here that fill in the thing, whatever that is, AI or something. I don't know.
I'm a few years older than you, so I've got the same what those kids are doing.
But they just need to. They don't need, so this is this thing of stealth. So actually, so much of art today is about infiltration, especially after the last 2-3 years and social justice movements. That the art is so much a place where people can find a space to tell stories and really get people to listen to stories and think in other ways. And to do that, artists need to be kind of stealthy.
Do you think it also, when you talk about that sort of profusion of art and of I don't want to say fashion, but clothing, the atomization of the internet and the way we're now everywhere and nowhere in terms of, where influences come from. We're no longer geographically bound by a lot of things, even though we're sitting in our rooms, we're seeing,
everything from all around. Yeah, I'm not sure, because a kind of real big revelation to me when I was doing fashion criticism was menswear is a real kind of, I say this with knowing all the caveats. Menswear is a tough gig. I know it's not a tough gig. You're in Milan and Paris. It's fabulous.
We all have the worst job ever, but we all understand that it could be so much worse.
But the thing about menswear is it's in January and June, and when you're a newspaper critic, you don't get the fancy car limo waiting outside to take to the next thing. You've got to get the subway. So the subway in January and June, and in Paris in particular, it's like doing the Monopoly board in a day. Like the one show will be deep south, one show will be like up, and and every January and June I would get sick by the end of it, like either get a cold or heat exhaustion, and so I booked to go to Mexico City for the first time one February after a season of Menswear, and this was like 2014, I'm guessing. And around that time was a lot of talk about globalization, and fashion brands were taking Asia seriously finally after being quite dismissive of it. Globalized. But then also many people were saying like, oh, everything now looks the same, it's globalized, and it's kind of like an assumed kind of thing in fashion that's how things are. And so I'd been writing about this global look and all this sort of stuff, and then got to Mexico City and found this city with this entire language of garments, all of its own. And I was obsessed. And I just spent the whole time watching people in clothes and watching the way they wore clothes. And to me, it was like tessellation. And in Mexico, I found bold color placed together in the same garment, never patterned. Never, but it was like a red with a yellow or a blue with a green. And that seemed to match the tessellation. When you fly into Mexico City, you suddenly see all these houses of all different colors that all tessellate. And it just seems to do with that volume of humans, but the way that they can just live together with this grace. I found it the most graceful city. Obviously now generalizing, but if you walk down the street in London, you get banged into all the time. We've got no idea how to be. Everyone says sorry the whole time. It's like, you're not sorry. It's kind of the mess of London. But then when I was in Mexico City, with all those millions of people, but everyone flowed so gracefully, this understanding of how to be together as humans, and the language of the clothes seemed to match that. And so I'm always, I don't think it's necessarily the case that everyone looks the same, although we have this kind of ability to look at
maybe our online versions are the same. We actually need to get out in the world more.
Exactly. There's necessarily differences in location because of environment, because of climate, so many different things. So I actually think that's also one of the things that actually gives artists power with casual clothing, though, is that it looks like everyone's wearing the same, so it allows them to be stealthy. Whereas within it, there's so much else going on, and so many other kind of codes and messages, and
make art yourself?
No.
Ever tried?
I
took up drawing at 50, and it's changed my life.
I do really enjoy painting and drawing. I love it. I do it all the time. But I
don't mean making art in terms of going to be in a gallery, but just
no. I absolutely do. And we always drew. I doodle all the time, and I draw. I'm doing a drawing right now, but I would never. Never say it was art. Yeah,
it's art if you're not doing it for again for some other purpose, but just learning to see.
And also the thing as well is that like I'm also very suspicious whenever anyone says like fashion is art. So no, it's not. And I actually always listen to designers such as Rei Kawakubo of Comme des Garçons, and she's very clearly it's not art, it's fashion. And I'm always suspicious of those within fashion who need to call their work art. And why can't they be
just comfortable with?
Well, find everything, because also it's not even just comfortable, but find glory within design in that same way that the garments that Agnes Martin wore, although they appear simple, there's kind of deep complexity in a garment that functions. And I'm suspicious of anyone that needs to say it's art, and I always think it means they're not really looking at what they're doing and are trying to cover up for
trying to elevate or
elevate
themselves.
Something that needs to maybe need a bit more work.
In fact, his last week's guest was talking about the Alexander McQueen Inferno or Dante event back in the 90s and how that was life-changing for her. I've always found tension or difficulty in understanding that difference, I guess, in terms of, is this supposed to be art? Because clearly this is not meant to be worn. And, and then seeing the McQueen exhibition at the Met a few years ago, that was one of those, clearly my categories and silos just do not work in this world. And I'm unable to grasp, what the intention is, I guess, or what the purpose beyond everything.
I've not checked back to see what that was Alexander McQueen's, what it was known by. I've not checked back to see what Lee said about it. I don't know whether he ever talked about his own work as art or not, but I didn't see that show. I saw some early shows of McQueen. I snuck in, or I was doing work experience at Vogue once, and there was a spare ticket, so I kind of on the back row of one, and then as I started working in fashion, I got to go to some. But I bought McQueen with my early paychecks from the early years, so I have a couple of frock coats from the very beginning that you can tell are his cut. Before then there were design teams and he was less involved. But again, for me, it's that thing of like art is so like the one thing, and garments are produced as fashion. They're produced as a design product, and I like having no confusion about it. It's really clear to me, and I actually think that it's one of the things I'm interested in is how the word fashion is so denigrated and such a sort of thing that seems so sort of like, fashion. And actually, I think the word doesn't necessarily have those connotations. Obviously, I think fashion industry causes it to have those connotations, sure. and very rightly gives many people deep misgivings and concerns about the word fashion. But if you separate fashion from fashion industry, then you can start seeing it in a much more benevolent way and much more connected to human beings and their relationship with each other and how they exist in the world.
And that's the difference between art and the art world.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can, I'm sure you've also followed all the crazy NFT business, and this is the next step for art. I'm like, no, this is the next step for scamming people out of money with some pretense of art. But unless you're, minting your own NFTs or something, in which case I've
not at all. And that's also one of the kind of main kind of things of the book is that like I always try and approach each artist as a human being, an artist, rather than this figure that the art industry currently
there's never anything about like collect. I don't think the word collected shows up anywhere in there about like collectors feel that artists
definitely not. And there's never the word legendary, there's never the word iconic, there's never the word best anything, because like it's that stuff is so uninteresting to me and leaves so many people out, and actually I think those that are called that, then become that, and then no one actually says, yeah, but what about the work? And if then that goes over decades of misogyny, racism, homophobia, then that's how you end up with a white male canon of art, of who is meant to be the artists, centuries worth.
Excluded from it.
Yeah, who gets excluded from it. And then also then that's interesting in terms of like, what then do artists do to try and find ways into it? So I have a chapter on clothing in performance, and often the original artists working in performance, even before performance art had its name, they were just trying to make work because they were completely excluded from the gallery system at the time, and through misogyny or racism. And so they created their own spaces and did their own work within it. And that's what then created performance art. And the thing about performance art is that it's bodily and it involves wearing garments. And performance artists think about everything in their performance, including what they wear. So to look at the clothing of performance artists then gives you a way in. You know, I think people often find performance art very difficult and tricky, both either to understand or endure. You know, the thing about performance art is you're kind of required to sit there, often in very uncomfortable spaces, with someone doing maybe something quite uncomfortable and challenging in front of you. So I think some people,
which is even worse.
Yeah. So people sometimes find performance art, they're quite repelled by it. But I think by talking about the clothing that performance artists wears, you kind of cut through all that stuff, and you can actually get a way into what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, and you can cut away that kind of anxiety.
Who didn't you get to include in the book?
So the book was,
there were rights issues, space issues,
no. The very early on, one of my first rules of the book was that Picasso would be in the book, and Picasso would get one line.
Yeah. And the Brent Hunt stripes.
One line and one photo. And if Picasso got one line and one photo, that meant that there could not be, why have I only got why is this artist or galleries being like, they need to have, they'll agree to be in it, but if you give them this much space, all that kind of jostling.
Yeah.
If Picasso gets one line, then that gets rid of all that stuff. And then as I was going on with the book, I realized that, the time in which I wrote the book was the time in which I wrote the book. And there are going to be certain artists who can talk and certain artists who can't talk, because they'd be preparing for an exhibition, or they'd have just had an exhibition and be in a complete spiral of depression after an exhibition. You know, it's kind of psychologically tough being an artist, and there's only so much brain space that artists have. And I really realized that, to do the book, and this is also why, I hate language like the best or legendary or whatever anyway, but that's another reason to not have that language, because it's not like these are the best dressed artists. And also, it is not a book about the best dressed. Often I'm most interested in actually messy clothes and dirty clothes and badly dressed. But also, if I was to write the book now, it would be a completely different book, because some of the artists who were able to give me a huge amount of time would now be in the process of doing an exhibition, or would now be depressed after an exhibition, and others who weren't able would be able to. So it kind of really freed me up, because it doesn't have that thing of I've got to get them and I've got to get them. It's like, I never wanted to force anyone to be in the book. It was always can you do it? Oh, brilliant, you can do it. Let's talk.
I got over that with the show also. There were people I used to just totally fixate on, and it turned into, if they don't get back to me, or it's a no for now.
Fine.
Yeah,
it's fine.
There are other people I can get.
Exactly. And actually that opens up other people. Yeah. There were a couple of artists, and I won't name them, but there were a couple of estates of male artists who were so appalled and horrified that I would be asking about their clothes.
Yeah.
And it was so indicative of the fragility of the status.
Yeah, that you're not taking him seriously as a big man artist.
As a big man artist. Yeah. And it was really it was really pushed me onwards, because it's if that's what they think, there really is something here.
Yeah, you're clearly going the right way.
And I don't need to include them. Who cares? Because the thing is, I think there's just over 80 artists in the book. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of artists. So it's never the case that and so I didn't care, but there were a couple of very, very, very big name, artist estates that were so rude And there was one in particular that was so rude to me and was like, how dare you? This artist hated fashion. He said this in this text, blah, blah, and sent me this quote. And so rude. A year later, they're doing a collaboration with a fashion house. And it's like, are you kidding me? So you take the check.
Yeah, the check cleared, and therefore they now care about it.
So, so I'm not going to say who.
No, you'll tell me off mic. My world is a non-disclosure agreement, so you can dish when we're not recording.
But the thing that also freed me up in the books, it's like, if I was to write the book now, it would be a different book. And I would also love for someone else to write this book. Like, I don't have ownership of this. I would love to have someone else's opinion on this. And I think there's so much in it. And I would love to have someone else write about other artists in it. And I would love for that to happen.
The book's been out about a year in the UK. It's just coming out in the US now. What was the reception like there?
Oh my God, it was wild. And actually, I just got sent a photo of a kid from the UK who's just had the cover tattooed on his arm. So it was really wild. But I also wrote the book purposefully hoping that the reader will be activated in it. So I talk to the reader often in terms of, like, when I'm talking about the implications of an artist's clothing, I also then say it makes us think about our own clothing too, or it can make us think. I invite the reader to think about their own relationship with clothing. And again, it's never judgmental. So it's never like, ugh, look at how that, it just is. Let's look at this and let's look at what this means. And
I didn't take the tailoring chapter as an indictment of the fact that I would have shown up wearing a suit here or at least a nice jacket, but more of a consciousness of, what it means.
Right. Yeah.
And it's funny, again, it depends based on the context. My day job, I run a pharmaceutical trade association. I've got this completely different lobbyist life. I go to trade shows. If I showed up here in a suit, you would say Gil's very conservative, arts-related podcaster. I go to a trade show, they will say Gil is the most flamboyant person here because he's wearing a suit none of us could dare try to get away with. We have to wear our gray and navy, and I can... So everything falls out of different contexts that we're in, but certainly that's making us think about it is important.
Yeah, exactly. The messaging and the language of it. And the thing about tailoring is that it's globally understood as this language of power and authority. Like, we all understand when we see politicians wearing a suit, they are attempting to claim authority. And it becomes even more like this as people move away from wearing a suit in work. And actually I've come, since I wrote the book, I've come to really think about this more. And I really do think that everyone is an expert on clothing, because we all understand these signals. Like, we all understand uniform.
There's something I ask artists. Are you able to turn your eye off?
But none of us are. Literally none of us are. We spend our lives, like, going as part of our way of interacting with the world.
Instantly assessing people based on...
In a nanosecond. And it's just so natural. We all do it. And we're all experts. Like, everyone is an expert on garments. That's how we all interact. And yet, most humans, including those who've worked within fashion, if you were to say, like, oh, you look nice today. Oh, what are you wearing? If you said it to me, I would go, it's just this stuff. Like, and deflect it and kind of push it away. Or often those who feel outside of fashion industry are kind of like, oh, but please, can you tell me the secret? Tell me the best pant I should need to wear, which of course is a tool of fashion industry to make people buy more. So it's exploited. That isn't.
As you say, the several £1,000 pair of jeans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or several £100 pair of jeans over time because people still don't feel like they've got the perfect jean. It's exploited and actually kind of fostered. Like, fashion industry wants you to feel bad about clothing, so you spend more money. So it's this dichotomy of, like, we're all experts in clothing, and yet we all feel like we're complete, like, novices and know nothing and are on the outside of it. Like the Met Gala that was earlier this week, you're meant to be enthralled of these people. Like, oh, how do they get to be like that? And it's like, well, we know, like, thousands of pounds and a million hands making these disgusting clothes that had no reason to exist apart from on this, like, weird red carpet, whatever it is, for the display, to make money for the luxury brands that are there, that have bought a ticket to make more money, to make you go and buy a handbag because you've seen that brand's name on the thing. We all know what it is. It's This is at the heart of the book, is this sense of like, actually, if we talk about clothing in a really simple and fundamental sense, we can connect with everyone's deep expertise in clothing. And actually, once we connect with our own expertise in clothing, we can push out and away from this fashion industry stuff and actually think about clothing in a much more open way that allows us to buy less, be happier with who we are, be happier in our garments, not get so up about it, and actually use garments to function as well, like Agnes Martin does. So,
I was actually asking my pal Nicole Rudick, who just did the autobiography of Niki de Saint Phalle, whether she had anything to ask for this, and she's like, not directly, but it reminds me of, reading about the book, reminds me of the story of Gloria Steinem seeing Niki walking down the street in like cowboy gear with no purse or something. And Steinem goes to, I forget who she was talking to. She's like, that is the first free woman I've ever seen in my life. Like she just, and again, it wasn't Niki in her art making gear.
Because Niki is a human being.
Yeah, and she just blew Gloria Steinem's brain or mind. But it's and
the thing is that like and that's also in the moment we're living in right now. Like those stories, that historical stories about artists in the 20th century. Right now, 21st century, with what's happening with abortion in the Supreme Court, like, we're in a moment where talking about free women is really important. So actually to assume that all this stuff with garments has been done and dealt with, it's not the case. Like so actually, I'm also never overstating the role of garments. I also want to always keep it at the right level. But I do think that if we can push against this kind of way that we see each other and the codification of clothing, this language of power, we can maybe start to tease these things open a bit and use garments to push outwards into other ways of thinking.
How's the pandemic affected what you wear, how you look at your closet, etc.?
I was so lucky with the pandemic in terms of this book in particular, because I finished the last version. I finished the second draft the week before the pandemic, and that was the last time I needed to be in a library researching. So, and I was so happy that the book never involved having to ask someone like, "Oh, your garments in the pandemic," because actually, I think all that the pandemic did for garments, all it's done is speed up things that were already happening. And I think to talk about it in terms of pandemic is to give the pandemic too much credence. Like, clothing was already becoming more casual.
It's accelerated that process.
It's accelerated things. And for me, it's just accelerated buying less, being less in thrall of fashion in terms of like a need to buy. So it's encouraged me to wear what I own already, to go back to garments from before, to wear the same thing again.
Did you figure out your good Zoom angle early on?
I was very lucky, didn't actually have to do that many. I love cookbooks, so I've got a big pile of cookbooks, and but that was the effect of me. I do volunteer gardening, so like I've always got functional clothes for gardening. I love gardening as well anyway. Like for writing, you need to move your arms. So so I guess also it just was a kind of focus on functional garments as well.
Do you find it easier to cull clothing or books from your life? Which one do you find it more difficult to get rid of? Again, I know you've donated some of your things.
Both very difficult. Culling clothing, I think. But I donate. I donate garments to the Victorian Albert Museum in London. And
you mentioned a passage about that in the book.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, the first time I did it, like I just presumed they would dry clean it when they got it, so I just gave them stuff. I didn't really understand what happened in institutions, and then the first time this sweater was exhibited, the arms of the mannequin were folded. And I was like, that's a really curious pose, but I thought maybe they wanted the mannequin to look butch. And then I looked closer, and the arms were covering up an egg stain. And like, I was like, okay. But no, so that was the donation of garments is so that these new stories of menswear, in particularly in the UK, can be told in the future. So I donate mostly the work of young London designers and actually often they were working just before the internet as well. They were definitely working for iPhones or the early days of the internet, and it's actually quite hard to find out things about them. And it was really important to me that the V&A had original garments by this kind of movement to return menswear to London. So that's why I donated those. My wardrobes at home are a mess.
Yeah. And I recently went through a book. As well. I went through a book cull recently. Right. I have not gone through the clothing cull. Just consists of putting them off to the side, but never quite actually getting rid of stuff. But yeah. There's always there was a stretch where once it looked like we were starting to get out of the pandemic, I guess into 21, I just took all my suits and went down to the dry cleaner every week. I brought down 2 with the idea of I will need to wear these again someday.
Right.
And I need to keep Jason in business because he's still here and the other 2 dry cleaners in our area went out of business over the course of this.
Right.
But let me just get back to that process and try again. But yeah, it's the going months without taking anything but, sweatpants and shorts and a T-shirt or a pullover. It was very strange. In those lights. Even having to go on Zoom, it was just, I'll put a polo shirt on. Nobody's going to object. Once the hair started to get out of control, that was the one thing where I realized I needed to tie everything back and keep my head completely stable on. I actually had an aborted national TV appearance. Aborted because it was recorded, but it was recorded on January 6th, half an hour before the insurrection, therefore was never going to air.
Priorities.
But that one, I suit and tie, had the hair gelled and pulled back completely so no one could tell, and just rehearsed keeping my head stable so they weren't going to see this giant ponytail, going in the background, because the Today Show, and I needed to look like I knew what I was talking about. But there's all that coding and like I say, it really, comes to the fore in the casual section near the end of the book in terms of what it means and what they're signaling and not signaling. Like you said, the attempt at transparency or protective coloration. It's
and the Today program's a really perfect example. If you watch it through the clothing, then you realize how much of a uniform that thing is, of what you're meant to look like to be presentable, to have authority. If you were to turn up to
the tie show, was red, white, and blue.
Exactly.
It's little things like that.
If you were to turn up to a recording in a hoodie, then they would probably cut your slot, or it would be seen as insurrection to use that word. It really is a very codified world once you start looking at the way that garments are used in media in particular, but the way we all live.
So what are you seeing in New York in terms of what people wear? Like what's jumping out at you? Or is it like me the last time I was in the city and noticed everybody is black and gray?
You know what? Again, not a huge amount of colour. I mean, the thing is, we're from London, so there was, you can probably hear rain while we're speaking, outside. But there was one sunny day, 2 days ago, and it was only 22 degrees. But for us from London, that's like a heat wave. So me and my husband were in shorts and t-shirt, and everyone else was still in their kind of quilted gilet's and stuff. I guess not. But no, you know what? The thing with New York, I guess what I love about New York is the wildness that's still here, and you can only do all you can to encourage it. I actually think that I definitely know that AIDS crisis hit New York with way more severity than in the UK. I think the UK government, it was a conservative government at the time, but there was one minister who was very good at pushing the safe sex message and actually making it government policy and actually doing stuff. Whereas in America,
things were
really, really bleak, and I do think that it's much more important to, whenever people talk about gentrification, you need to link it to AIDS crisis, as in Sarah Schulman's book Gentrification of the Mind, and so all we can do is encourage wildness, and so there's an artist, Taboo, who I taught
was just
with in
going
the
to mention.
book. Yeah. And
I first came across Taboo in the 80s on Howard Stern's radio show because they were so off the wall. And as you can say, Stern was, ridiculing or whatever, but he really did bring a lot of people, misfits, people who did not fit into the culture. He actually did more. There was a subversive aspect to it all.
So Taboo is he's still working. He is an artist who's been working in New York for 4 decades. And Taboo actually has like world fame in ways that many people don't know, because Taboo did the art for the first D-Light album cover. And
I had no idea until I saw that.
So Well Clipped, Grooves in the Heart, all those spirals, that lettering, that glorious lettering, is Taboo's handwriting. That's just how he writes. And so as a kid, like, D-Light was everything to me. Like, I was in the final year of.
I find that so hard to believe. I'm just kidding. The early 90s, that would have just been right up your
and Taboo, D-Light hit in the summer holiday before my final year, and I was like, oh my God. And I went back to my final year at school, and every school folder I painted spirals on it. In the room at school, I had spirals on the wall. Like, it was everything to me, and I still now draw spirals all the time. Taboo lives in one of the alphabet cities. Is it called?
The East Village.
East Village, which is now
gentrifying rapidly.
But for decades not. And he lives on the top floor of a 5-story walk-up, rent controlled, and he's been making art through the whole 4 decades, and he's been recognized by his peers, but not recognized by art world or collectors. But then suddenly, like about 4, 5, 6 years ago, people started buying his art. And Taboo's response has been to buy fashion. He buys clothes, and he has such joy in it. And the thing with Taboo is that garments have been so important through his life, but never fashion. He wasn't enthralled to Vogue. He wasn't enthralled to designer houses. He was just buying stuff and wearing it. And he had drag. Drag was part of his practice in the 80s and 90s, particularly the Pyramid Club. So there was the garments of drag, but also just in everyday life. And he really connects the garments he wears with the paintings he makes, with living. Like they all go together. They're all part of the same thing. And he lives with total joy in fashion and pleasure in fashion. He's the most extraordinary human. Taboo did a talk. I did a talk with him a couple of days ago in New York. And he turned up in one look, a Dries Van Noten kind of knit polo and some pants, and he just commanded the stage and just was like, he's so fabulous but also that way fabulous and serious. And it's also that way that those who engage in flamboyancy or pleasure or fun are often not taken seriously, whereas actually their message is way more serious than those that talk in ponderous language believing they're serious. And then halfway through the talk, Taboo was like, oh, what does everyone great do? And I think there's costume change. And so he puts his microphone down and he strips off to his underwear and changes his outfit and turns into this kind of day-glow lime green shirt and pants, and then climbs on a stool and shows off his look. And it was wild. And it was that real thing of like that if you just connect with garments. And I, obviously, by saying this, I'm not therefore saying that everyone is taboo. Taboo is taboo. But just in like thinking about garments and connecting with them a bit more, you can then push out from the assumption of gentrification and push into it and push somewhere else. So
what's next?
So
you make reference to a novel and something that I was reading about your
there's fiction is a thing that's always happening in another plane of my brain. But like I'm currently working on a book that's
don't jinx it.
Exactly. It's like I kind of want, but it's the end of this book is the jumping off point for the next book.
That's all you need.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also very definitely not part two. And a really important thing for me when I began is that, this is what artists wear. There isn't going to be what actors wear, because to do what actors wear, I would need access to the contracts between actors and luxury brands to understand how much they're being paid to wear those clothes. Right. What clause is there in the contract that says you're not allowed to wear these other brands? The stuff behind the thing that we think is the truth is, that I would never get access to that stuff, so I could never write it. There's something very particular about artists in that actually, I'm usually talking about artists in their studio or in their personal life or their downtime. It strikes
me as exactly like your menswear. Or even going into the fashion writing.
Right. Yeah.
Focus on artists, you could stay under the radar.
Exactly. And so it's not a kind of public performative thing often. It's actually often about who they are themselves. And artists are so totally unique because of this sense that, for most of them, they don't have to dress for work. They don't have to dress to engage in a kind of formal 9-to-5 thing. And so by looking at their garments, we can really look at the codification of garments and what they really mean. And there's no other kind of case study that I think you can do that with in the same way. But the next book is a very different case study of a different sort of person.
We'll wait for that one. We'll connect when you're back in New York for that one too. But do you have a Cindy Sherman-esque alter ego, or are you just so fragmented in terms of the world you live in?
No. Okay. No. No other alter ego. No,
David Byrne, Mr. Man sort of thing.
I've attempted drag a couple of times, and I'm not very. Yeah, it doesn't really. Yeah,
that's why I keep the beard with the long hair. I just have I'm relatively masculine looking, but I'd like to just have the reinforcement of the beard.
No, it's all. But no, the thing for me is that also, I've been a journalist for 25 years now. And the thing about journalism is that that's the thing to break out of, and doing these books is helping me break out of it. And actually, it actually is very similar to Boo's point of view. Everything is the same thing. Like I co-run a rave in London with a couple of friends, and I play records at it. And to me, it's the same thing as writing. They're all the same thing. Or gardening's the same thing as writing. Like it's all the same thing. So there's not like another.
Yeah, I need to change into this
No,
person.
I think about the writing when I'm doing the DJing, or I think about they're all the same thing.
So last question. What's most cutthroat? Fashion world, art world, journalism? Or which is the lowest circle of hell for you?
Which is the most cutthroat. They cut throats in different ways. Yeah. It's different knives, different.
Which runs you into the ground the most?
Yeah. So actually, the thing for me is actually that like when I was being a fashion critic, after the shows, I would escape into the art world. Yeah. And I engage with the art world to write this book.
Art versus the art world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But then once I finished the book, it was like, okay, I'm done with that for a while. And I then went back and kind of found the space in fashion again. So it was more like I kind of do one for a little while as much as I can. Okay, I get out. And
this is a little too toxic for me right now. And
different forms of toxicity.
Oh, I forgot the real last question. Who are you reading?
Oh, okay. I'm just started I think it's Notebooks of Wittgenstein that's just been published here. It's called Wittgenstein. I think it's called Young Wittgenstein. 1914 to 1916. And it just came out here. I
will point out to listeners that he did a degree in philosophy before all this stuff began. So this isn't just like idle. Oh, hey, I'm going to get into Wittgenstein.
But the thing with Wittgenstein is that like Wittgenstein is so glorious, and the thing is, his pupils, his friends talked about how they would go to his classes in Cambridge and would sit there not understanding a word of it. Like part of it is not understanding it and releasing yourself from that thing that you've got to understand stuff. But then every so often he says something that is so profound in these moments of like bringing it all together that you kind of read all this stuff and it's like, I really don't know where we're going. And then, oh my God, wow. You just said that. And so, yeah, I'm super excited to read these notebooks, which I think are from the period before he was coming up with the Tractatus, which is his first thing. I actually don't know if I've just pronounced Tractatus
that's
correctly
fine.
or not. But
that's always been my thing. I just let the other person make any pronunciations and comments. So I didn't name any of the artists that you mentioned. I'm like, I'm going to screw up somebody's name doing this.
Yeah.
But the Wittgenstein is your main reading.
Yeah, and also I should say as well, I've fallen asleep in the introduction. So there's currently the reading about 4 lines of the introduction. But yeah.
I figured. Do you tend to balance multiple books, or do you try to just focus on a single thing?
It depends. Oh no, I if I'm reading, I read one thing. But the thing is that the work I'm doing at the moment involves a lot of reading. So actually, I've not been doing reading for a while. I've been doing a lot of reading.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's the thing.
I'll let you get back to that. I'll let you get back to the UK. Charlie, thanks so much for coming on. This book was a joy to read. So I'm awfully glad to get the time with you.
Thanks so much for your time. Thank you.
And that was Charlie Porter. His new book is What Artists Wear, which is out now in North America from Norton. It came out last year in the UK from Penguin, as mentioned, and it's a different size, different shape, different sort of book, but it's really great, whatever edition you get of it. And the only online presence I found for Charlie is Instagram, where he's on as The Charlie Porter, all one word, TheCharliePorter. I'll put a link to that in the show and episode notes for this one. He does have a website, but that hasn't been updated since 2019, so I'll put a link to that in too, but not going to recommend you jump to that. Now, the book he's talking about at the very end is the recently released Wittgenstein's Private Notebooks, 1914 to 1916. Funnily enough, the guest I recorded with this weekend suggested I record with the translator of that book, not knowing anything about Charlie's reference to it. I just asked this guy, anybody I should record with? And he mentioned her, and I thought, of all weird connections, there you are. And afterward, Charlie did tell me about the artists and estates who turned him down, but I'm not going to tell you because I promised I wouldn't say anything. Sorry. Now, you can support the Virtual Memory Show by telling other people about it. Just let them know there's this weekly podcast with really interesting conversations with writers, artists, critics, translators, cartoonists, musicians, all sorts of neat people. You can also tell me what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie, TV show, book, comic, music, piece of theater, art exhibition, fashion show, whatever you think I should turn listeners onto or just check out myself. And you can do that by sending me a letter, email, postcard, or leaving me a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about me picking up and getting stuck in an awkward conversation. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you're going to go really long, call back, leave a second message. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. Wouldn't do it without your permission, but sometimes I figure people want to let the audience know what they're up to. So now's your chance. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. My day job treats me just fine. I've got the Patreon, but there'll be a link to that. You don't have to give me anything. There's not a whole lot of expenses with the show as is. So what I'd really like you to do, if you do have money or other resources to spare, give to individuals or institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Topato Go. You can help them with their regular expenses. You can help them complete an artistic project. You can support their ongoing work, whatever it is. If you've got a little bit to spare and there's people you want to help out, it's a great way to do it through all those sort of crowdfunding methods. And when it comes to institutions or foundations, I give to my local food bank every month. I occasionally give to other places like my alma mater, my grad school alma mater, the Poor People's Campaign. You can find freedom funds, election funds, refugee funds, women's rights funds, Planned Parenthood, things like that. There's a lot of things you can do if you've got some resources to spare that'll help us build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth. used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY, the number 4, TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.